In the winter of 1935-36, Matsutaro Shoriki, the chairman of the Yomiuri Shimbun, set out to start a professional baseball league for his team, the Dai Nippon Tokyo Yaku Club, to play once they got back from a North American tour. To do this, he largely courted major railway and newspaper companies in Japan's three largest cities, Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. While Nagoya's railways didn't show much interest, their two rival newspapers did, the Shin Aichi Shimbun and the Nagoya Shimbun. Both papers would start teams, with the Shin Aichi Shimbun's team confusingly being named the Nagoya Baseball Club, while the Nagoya Shimbun would found the Nagoya Golden Dolphins. The Nagoya Baseball Club would later become the Chunichi Dragons. While the team was officially based out of Nagoya, the Nagoya Baseball Club would bounce around several ballparks in the early days, fitting the traveling circus nature of early Japanese professional baseball. In those early years, the Nagoya Shimbun would distinguish themselves from the JPBL with their willingness to sign foreign players. The first non-Japanese players in what is now NPB were pitcher Herbert North and catcher Andrew Bucky Harris. Japanese Americans George Matsuura and Sam Takahashi would also join them. This actually caused the Nagoya Baseball Club to be quite unpopular with fans, as they were seen as a team of mercenaries rather than a homegrown Japanese team. All four would be gone in 1937, with Harris and Takahashi joining the expansion Kurakuin Eagles, along with the club's first general manager, Yasumichi Kono. The other major influence on the Nagoya Baseball Club was Meiji University, the alma mater of most of the Shin Aichi Shimbun's higher-ups. Many of the team's players would be recruited from the ranks of their baseball team, and that would continue until the draft came around in 1965. The early core was largely formed by first baseman Kiyoshi Osawa, ace Kozo Matsuo, and two-way phenom Michio Nishizawa, who was signed at 15 years old in 1937. The team was also pretty bad. While they would have their first winning season in 1940, in 1941 they got the distinction of being the only team in professional baseball to get no-hit 4 times in a single season. Their first no-hitter would not come until a year later, when Michio Nishizawa no-hit the Hankyu Baseball Club at Kurakuin Stadium on July 18, 1942. After that season, the Shin Aichi Shimbun would be forced to merge with the Nagoya Shimbun as part of the Wartime Newspaper Consolidation Act, creating the Chibu Nippon or Chunichi Shimbun. Although the name Nagoya Baseball Club would stick until 1944, financial issues would cause Chunichi to hand over control of the club to Riken, who renamed the team the Sangyo Baseball Club for the shortened 1944 season. While Chunichi would get the team back in 1946, they would lose 2 things. First, their superstar, as Michio Nishizawa had defected to the Gold Star Baseball Club, and second, their home. The team would be forced to spend 3 years in Tokyo to simplify the organization of the JPBL post-war, as well as give Chunichi time to build them a new ballpark in Nagoya. What they did gain was a name. After the 1946 season, the JPBL decreed that teams would have to have nicknames, and the decision of what that nickname would be would fall onto the shoulders of the paper's chairman, Toranosuke Sugiyama. While Sugiyama initially wanted the name Chunichi Tigers because the Tora in his name means tiger, the Osaka Tigers already had it, so he chose to name the club after his Chinese zodiac symbol, the dragon. Amusingly, the team would misspell the word on their 1947 uniforms, which said Doragons, but those would be fixed by 1948. Their first year under their new name would be their most successful so far, as they would have their best season yet, finishing second in the JPBL. But Sugiyama would still fire the club's general manager, Masashi Akimine, following this, because they didn't finish first. He would go to the Daiei Stars and take most of the Dragons' talent with him, including a young phenom named Makoto Kozuru. This has been remembered in history as the Akimine Whirlwind. The team would immediately fall to last place, but for 1949, they would finally get to move to their hometown, moving into the brand new Chunichi Stadium. They would also get Michio Nishizawa back and signed a 23-year-old kid out of Meiji University named Shigeru Sugishita. After joining the Central League in 1950, Sugishita and Nishizawa would immediately make the club a force to be reckoned with. Nishizawa would club 46 homers, and Sugishita would lead NPB in strikeouts as the Dragons finished second in the CL. With a lot of their core still incredibly young, it looked like they'd be in first place in no time. But the Giants and Tigers had a little something to say about that. In 1951, the Nagoya Railway would buy a stake into the team and take over management, renaming the team the Nagoya Dragons, a name that's sometimes still used to refer to them in the West. Then, on August 19th, 1951, their stadium burned down. A cigarette butt had fallen onto trash that had collected underneath the outfield bleachers, and quickly the fire had gotten out of control, engulfing both the stadium and the surrounding area. The resulting crowd crush killed 4 and injured over 300. Some Chunichi Dragons players who'd experienced air raids during the war had their PTSD triggered by the event, and the team would move into Narumi Stadium until Chunichi Stadium was rebuilt for the 1952 season. To avoid any future fires, the grandstands would instead be made out of concrete. Still, the Dragons never finished lower than 3rd as the Central League stabilized itself, and while the Nagoya Railway would sell their shares back to Chunichi in 1954, the Dragons would go on to win their first Central League pennant that year. They'd take on the Fukuoka-based Nishitetsu Lions in that year's Japan series, making it the first Japan series to not take place in either Tokyo or Osaka. The Dragons would eventually prevail in 7 games, thanks in large part to Shigeru Sugishita throwing 4 complete games in games 1, 4, 5, and 7, while also pitching 3 2/3 innings in relief in Game 2. Immediately after winning that Japan series, the club was almost bought by Toyota, who had a plan to rename the team the Crowns after their flagship model. However, Toyota's board refused to sign off on the deal, worrying that success would hurt sales in Osaka and Tokyo as angry baseball fans would buy cars from other brands. Instead, Toyota elected to merely sponsor the team, something they continue to do to this day. Sugishita would continue to be the ace for much of the mid-50s, but as you can imagine, running your ace into the ground like that wasn't exactly good for his health. And while the Dragons would remain an A-class team for much of the rest of the decade, they had a habit of shooting themselves in the foot, because they had a policy. They would cut everyone on the team who was over 30 years old. I kid you not. This didn't really affect the hitting core that much, but it did lead to the retirement of Shigeru Sugishita and other key veteran pieces on the team, as the team fell to 5th that year. But in 1961, the Dragons came incredibly close to the pennant, fighting the early O Nagashima Giants all the way to the finish before losing that pennant on the last day of the season. A big part of this was 22-year-old ace Hiroshi Gondo, who put up the best season by a Dragon ever on either side of the ball. He did this thanks in large part to throwing 429 innings. He was backed up by 21-year-old Eiji Bando and 20-year-old Yasuhiko Kawamura. None of these pitchers' careers would survive the decade. Sure would be nice to have a veteran arm to back up the kids, huh? Especially because Shigeru Sugishita had briefly come out of retirement and been solid for the Daimai Orions. The Dragons of the 1960s ended up sharing a lot in common with the Dragons of the 1950s. Good, but not good enough. In 1962, they would take the big step of hiring Hall of Famer Larry Doby and former Cy Young winner Don Newcombe as a bit of a publicity stunt, making them the first black players to play in the Central League. The mid-60s Dragons would develop into an offensive juggernaut. Shinichi Eto, Jim Marshall, Morimichi Takagi, and Toshio Naka helped form a core that is still arguably the best in Dragons history. But again, the Giants existed, and they had finished second behind them in 3 consecutive seasons from 1965 to 1967. Then, in 1968, the Dragons shocked everyone, not with their play, but with a complete rebrand, ditching the team colors of maroon to red and black and a vest-style jersey with an undershirt. These uniforms were not popular, and a massive collapse in May led to the Dragons finishing last for the first time in their history. Their quick recovery and their new Dodgers-inspired blue uniform ensured the blue would be their team color from here on out. But the problem remained the same. They couldn't displace the Giants on top. In fact, no one could, as the Giants won 9 Japan Series titles in a row. But the Dragons looked like they were building a core that could do it. While they'd circumvented the draft to sign their catcher, Tatsuhiko Kimata, they'd also drafted incredibly well, grabbing Kinji Shimatani and young ace Senichi Hoshino in 1968 and Kenichi Yazawa in 1969. They'd also used their American connections to get Gene Martin, who was being held down in AAA despite his excellent hitting. Add in more young pitchers in Yukitsura Matsumoto and Hidetaka Hoshino, and they finally built a team that could take on the Giants. And they would be the ones to finally get it done, as on October 12, 1974, Hoshino got Wales rookie Daisuke Yamashita to hit a line drive into Kinji Shimatani's glove, breaking up the V9 and clinching the first Dragons pennant in 20 years. 2球をまた打った三塁のところライナー越えた掴んだ中日優勝思わず I wish I could say it ended in a championship, but it didn't. After kicking up a big stink about not wanting to go play games in Sendai and forcing the opposing Lotte Orions to play their home games in Tokyo, the Dragons would lose the Japan Series in 6 thanks to a 10th inning RBI double from Sumio Hirota and a Herculean 10-inning performance from Joji Murata. Despite this high, and despite keeping most of their core around for the 70s, they could never get above 3rd place, much to the frustration of their players, many of whom would age out and retire before the end of the decade. Then, it all collapsed, as in 1980 the Dragons fell to last place for the first time since 1968. But just 2 years later, the Dragons would be back on top. They did this thanks to their young core, based around catcher Takayoshi Nakao, Ichiro's childhood hero Yasushi Tao, slugging shortstop Masaru Uno, and defensive wizard Ken Hirano, joined by young pitchers Tatsuo Komatsu, Kazuhiko Ushijima, Yujiro Miyako, and a young Taiwanese phenom named Yuan Chie-kuo, who Japanglish his name as Genji Kaku. Once again, they fought the Giants tooth and nail to the pennant. But this time, thanks to an unusually high amount of rainouts and a new ties rule, the Dragons had several games in hand to try and close out the pennant. Ace Tatsuo Komatsu would toss a complete game shutout against the Yokohama Taiyo Whales to win the pennant. Giants fans would immediately complain that the Whales had just laid down for their opponents to ensure that the Giants wouldn't win the pennant, but whatever happened, the Dragons were going to the Japan Series for a 3rd time. Their opponents? Another young, hungry team in the recently moved Seibu Lions. While the Dragons would put up a valiant effort, their pitching issues would come back to haunt them, especially against the offensive juggernaut that was the 82 Lions. It would all come crashing down after that. The Dragons would spend most of the mid-80s barely staying out of the basement. But then they took a bold step. They hired Shinichi Hoshino. Their former ace was a man who did everything in his power to win. Wa, or fighting spirit, was the mantra he lived and died by, and it was a mantra he instilled in his players day in and day out by working them to the bone. But it would take more than that to win games. Fortunately, there was a disgruntled superstar who wanted out of his team, and the Dragons pounced. 3-time Triple Crown winner Hiromitsu Yochii publicly demanded a trade, and the Dragons put on a full-court press to get him. They traded Seiji Kamikawa and 3 pitchers, Kazuhiko Ushijima, Shigeru Kuwata, and Sadaharu Hionuma. If you're wondering who won the trade, the Orions, now the Marines, would only have 1 winning season in the next 10 years. The Dragons immediately became contenders again. And they did so with a new look. With permission from the Dodgers, they transitioned from jerseys that were merely an homage to their cousins in LA to basically a 1-to-1 copy. This led to opposing fans mocking the team as the Dojagons, but there's a reason why the Dragons keep coming back to these jerseys. They immediately became really, really good. After finishing 2nd place in 1987, the Dragons had arguably their best season in the modern era in 1988, thanks to Ochiai, Kuo, Komatsu, Gary Rasich, and a cavalcade of youth. They scratched and clawed and brawled their way to the pennant, and stepping up to face them was, once again, the Seibu Lions. While the Dragons had been scratching and clawing their way to get back, the Lions had dominated the Pacific League in the 80s. This was their 6th PL pennant in 7 years. It wasn't even close. The Lions won it in 5. Eventually, Hoshino's hard-nosed style caught up with him. After several abuse scandals from high school managers started to hit the headlines, Hoshino, who employed similar tactics at a professional level, began to face more and more scrutiny, so he stepped down in favor of Morimichi Takagi. Takagi managed to salvage the core and turn the team back into a winner, and Alonso Powell would distinguish himself by winning the CL batting title 3 years in a row. But the Swallows and Giants were just too good, and a turbulent 1995 saw the team return to 5th place under 3 different managers. So, they brought back Hoshino. This time, Hoshino promised to manage with a lighter touch, and the team also had a bold new strategy: hiring Koreans. With the KBO establishing itself as a stable league, many of its biggest stars wanted to prove that their league was just as good as NPB, so they consistently tried to make the jump. The Dragons would grab 3 of the best of them: Dong Yeol-sun, arguably the greatest Korean pitcher of all time, fellow Haetai Tigers legend Jung Bum Lee, and LG Twins ace Sang Hoon Lee. Add in Leo Gomez, Kazuyoshi Tatsunami, Masahiro Yamamoto, Kosuke Fukudome, Koichi Sekikawa, Shigeki Noguchi, and Takeshi Yamazaki, and the Dragons would crawl their way back into the A-class in their brand new cathedral, the Nagoya Dome. Eventually, in 1999, everything would break right, and Takeshi Yamazaki hit one of the most iconic home runs in NPB history to clinch the Central League pennant. This time, they'd be facing another team with a lengthy championship drought, the Fukuoka Daiei Hawks. The Hawks had not won a title since 1964, and the city of Fukuoka hadn't won a title since 1958. The Hawks were also riding a wave of youth and were managed by none other than Sadaharu Oh, who turned the team from a joke to a juggernaut in less than 5 years. Fun fact, this was also the first Japan series that was played entirely indoors. Again, it wasn't even close. The Hawks shut out the Dragons 3 times while taking the series in 5. This would essentially spell the end of Senichi Hoshino's time in charge. He would leave to manage the Hanshin Tigers, and Hankyu Braves legend Hisashi Yamada would briefly take over. But the boys club in the front office and Chunichi's ownership didn't particularly like having an outsider at the helm. So despite 2 winning seasons under him, he would be unceremoniously forced out in favor of none other than Hiromitsu Ochiai. This also coincided with 2 things. 1, the mid-2000s rejection of retro, the scourge of baseball jerseys everywhere, and Frank McCourt buying the Dodgers and reportedly threatening legal action against the Dragons unless they opted to rebrand. These were the results. Oh well, at least they're the right color. While these jerseys were basic and pretty ugly, they also coincided with the most successful period in team history. While Fukudome, Inoue, Tatsunami, and Yamamoto were still around, they'd be joined by Hirokazu Ibata, Alex Ochoa, Kenshin Kawakami, and superstar closer Hitoki Iwase, backed up by Hall of Fame catcher Motonobu Tanishige. Pitching, contact, and defense were the name of the game for the 2004 Dragons, and they rocket to a pennant that everyone thought was going to go to the Yomiuri Giants. For the 4th time in club history, they'd be facing the Lions in the Japan series. This time, it was much closer. Thanks to the 2000s Rabbit Ball, the 2004 Japan series was a knockdown, drag-out slugfest. But unfortunately, the Lions rallied to take games 6 and 7 in Nagoya, and for the second time in its short history, a visiting team was celebrating a Japan series victory at the Nagoya Dome. The Dragons would remedy this by signing Tyrone Woods, and while they would fall to second behind the Hanshin Tigers in 2005, they'd rally back to the pennant in 2006. This was thanks to both Kosuke Fukudome having the greatest offensive season in Dragons history, and Tyrone Woods breaking the Dragons' single-season home run record by hitting 47 homers. Their opponents would be the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters, making their first Japan series in 25 years. While Kenshin Kawakami would outduel Yu Darvish in Game 1, the Dragons could only muster 4 runs in the final 4 games of the series. The Fighters won their first Japan series since 1962 in 5. 2007 looked like it would be another setback, as their face of the franchise Kosuke Fukudome suffered a season-ending elbow injury. But the team was so deep that they would still manage to rally and finish second. But they would catch a break. Following 3 consecutive demolitions in the Japan series, the Central League had finally decided to adopt the playoffs as well, so their teams would actually have momentum going into the Japan series. The Dragons would cruise through the playoffs, not losing a single game to either the 3rd place Tigers or 1st place Giants, and reach the Japan series where they'd be playing the Fighters again. This time, the Dragons would pull an Uno reverse card. They'd drop Game 1, then lay down a beating, outscoring the Fighters 22-4 in the final 4 games of the series. And it would all end with Daisuke Yamai and Hitoki Iwase throwing the only combined perfect game in Major Pro Baseball history. And after 53 years, the Dragons finally had their 2nd Japan Series title. However, the championship task came calling. Kosuke Fukudome left for MLB, and after failing to repeat in 2008, Kenshin Kawakami would leave too. Tyrone Woods also wouldn't be re-signed, as the official banning of steroids and the implementation of testing led the Dragons to back off from a player who'd had rumors of PED use circling around him for years. They did, however, have Kazuhiro Wada, who they'd signed over from the Seibu Lions, to lead the charge, and star third baseman Masahiko Morino was also entering his prime. So, after 2 CLCS exits at the hands of the Giants, the Dragons finally got their revenge and made the Japan Series again. This one was supposed to be easy. They were facing a Chiba Lotte Marines squad that had become the first third-place team to make the Japan Series. It was, in fact, not easy. It was a knockdown, drag-out brawl. Games 5, 6, and 7 all went to extras, and after a 15-inning tie in Game 6, Game 7 would end thanks to a 12th-inning RBI triple from Yoshifumi Okada, a man with an OPS under 500 that year. And thus, the Miracle Marines would be born. The Dragons still had stuff left in the tank, though. After finishing first in the regular season and dispatching the Swallows in the CLCS, they'd be facing the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks in the 2011 Japan Series. The Dragons were old and battle-tested. The Hawks were young, skilled, and smart. And it would be one of the best Japan Series finals of all time. Games 1 and 2 went 10 innings. Every other game was equally close. But in the end, the Dragons ran out of gas, as Toshiya Sugiyuchi and Tadashi Setsu held them scoreless in Game 7. That was their last shot. Although, thanks to Frank McCourt selling the Dodgers in 2012, the Dragons were once again able to adopt the Dodgers-esque wordmark that they'd been using for most of their history. And while they would win the CL wildcard in 2012 thanks to Tony Blanco, and come within a game of winning the CLCS, they were too old to take it over the finish line. They haven't made the playoffs since. There's a lot of reasons for this. Misplaced offensive scouting philosophy, truly inept management, and tactically inept managers, but probably the biggest thing is money. Chunichi are one of, if not the, poorest owners in Major Pro Baseball, and that harms them more than anything. They will occasionally try and splurge, but it's often on over-the-hill veterans like Sho Nakata who do absolutely nothing to turn the tide. What's worse is that the team itself is not that bad on paper, and has been that way for pretty much most of their playoff drought. But they've always lacked in-house developed high-end talent, and has failed to surround any high-end talent they sign with a deep supporting cast. Teams like this need to be smart and analytically minded to win, and unfortunately, the Dragons have been the opposite. While it's not fun to think about, the one solution that would probably stop this slide is selling the team. However, that is something that Chunichi will probably never accept. This team is their baby, their pride and joy. They started it, and they will see it through to the bitter end. That end will probably be selling the team to Toyota, who've gotten over their fears and currently own 2 of Nagoya's other sporting institutions, Nagoya Grampus and the Nagoya Fighting Eagles. Time will tell what happens to the Chunichi Dragons in the future, but there is one thing that remains certain. The Dragons are the pride of Nagoya, and their fans will pack the Nagoya Dome come hell or high water. The Dragons will continue to burn as brightly as they possibly can.